Okay, a lot of amens. So good to see you tonight. Thank you for joining us. All right. Supuede says, Dr. Sungenis, not by faith alone, footnote 51, claims that Jerome held that the works of the law which will not justify refers only to the ceremonial law. Can you provide a reference that can back up this assertion? That's a very interesting question there, Supuede. Because my friend Scott Hahn had made that claim when he first came into the church back in the late 80s. And that was the thing that had changed his mind about his view in the Protestant, when he was a Protestant, about the works of the law and how to understand justification. So I had trouble with that when I first heard it, when I first came into the church in 1993. And I started writing Not by Faith Alone in 1996. And I tried to find sources on this claim that Jerome held that the works of the law referred only to the ceremonial law. And I couldn't find any. And I was stunned by that. And then years later, and I went up to his house to talk to him about this, and I don't know how open he was to seeing that he was off the track on this, but years later, when they had written their commentary, was it Curtis Mitch was the guy who wrote the commentary under Scott Hahn. And so what they did in that commentary of Romans was they put both views in. They put what they claimed was Jerome's view, that the ceremonial, Jerome claiming that the works of the law only apply to the ceremonial law and not the civil and the moral law. And then they put Augustine's view, which was works of the law refers to everything. Ceremonial, moral, and civil laws. In other words, the whole Mosaic Law. And when you say that, basically you're saying that when the New Covenant came, the whole Mosaic Law was abolished. Not only ceremonial law like circumcision or sacrifices, but the moral law as well, the Decalogue, and the civil laws. In other words, the civil laws being, the punishment that was meted out for adultery or whatever. It was all abolished because it was all part of one system of law. That was Augustine's view. That was Aquinas' view. That was the Council of Trent's view. So I thought that was an interesting concession that they had made in their Romans commentary. But I looked again for support from Jerome, that Jerome actually said that the works of the law referred only to the ceremonial law, and it wasn't in their commentary. So I'm saying to myself, why did they put that in there? Why did they first give away the controversy by giving Augustine's view that works of the law refers to the whole Mosaic Law, and show everybody, okay, there's a difference of opinion here, and yet not back up what Jerome said, if he said it? Now, I told you when I was doing research on this many years earlier, I wasn't able to find where Jerome said that. An explicit statement that said, works of the law do not refer to the moral law, do not refer to the civil law of the Mosaic Law. It only refers to the ceremonial law. I was never able to find one. And to this day, I was never able to find one. So when I did the second edition of Not by Faith Alone, which about 10 years ago maybe, I wrote a letter to Scott Hahn. And I said, Scott, I'm doing a second edition, Not by Faith Alone. I would love for you, because you've made this claim for so many years, that Jerome said that the works of the law refers to the ceremonial law. Could you give me the references for that? I've asked you before. I haven't gotten any. I'm asking you again. Please provide the references to Jerome. No response. I waited months. No response. So I continued on with the second edition, Not by Faith Alone, and there weren't any references, so I didn't put them in there. All I said was some people claim that Jerome said that the works of the law refers only to the ceremonial law, without any references. Now, in his dissertation that he wrote, Scott Hahn had mentioned some other fathers like Ignatius, Irenaeus, the Discolia Apostolorum, I think, was one reference. Justin Martyr may have been another one. There were maybe 4 or 5 references. So again, I said, well, maybe this is where I have to go. The dissertation that he did for Marquette University. And I looked up all those references, and there was no explicit statement that any of those fathers, including the Didascalia Apostolorum, said that works of the law referred only and can only refer to the ceremonial law. Not one of them. And I, of course, hadn't found anything on Jerome still saying that same thing. I found that what was happening was that Dr. Hahn was taking these passages out of context and making conclusions of them that did not fit with either the whole of what the father said regarding the Mosaic Law or the ceremonial law, and certainly didn't agree with the preponderant view of the Catholic Church, even at that time, from Augustine, Ambrose, Chrysostom, you name it. And I quote them all. So the only thing that could possibly be was that the early fathers had a slightly different view than the latter fathers. And the reason I say that is because on eschatology, the early fathers had a completely different view than the latter fathers. The early fathers, Justin Martyr, Ignatius, Irenaeus, Papias, Lactantius, were all premillennialists. They believed in a 1,000-year future reign of Jesus on earth with the Jews reigning. And the latter fathers, Chrysostom, Ambrose, Augustine, so on and so on, including Jerome, threw that view out by its nose and rejected the whole thing and said, no, there is no future millennium for the Jews. The millennium is now. We are in it because it's a symbolic period of time. The church is in the millennium, and that will go until the second coming of Christ. So there's one instance where the early fathers were just totally rejected by the latter fathers, and the church accepted the latter fathers' teaching, which was first endorsed at the Council of Ephesus in 419, and then later on. So there was a chance that maybe the early fathers had said something different about the Mosaic Law, in that it was only the ceremonial law that was rejected by the church. But there was just nothing explicit from, and man, I did some research on it. I'll tell you, I looked at every nook and cranny I could find. There was no explicit statement. So the whole thesis then that the church, the Catholic Church, viewed the Mosaic Law, the rejection of it only from the ceremonial law, is totally false. Okay, it's totally false. And if that's what got Dr. Hahn into the Catholic Church, then it was based on a false premise. Okay, and I've been saying the same thing now for over 25 years. And this is an important thing, because if your view of the covenant, the Mosaic covenant, is faulty, then you're going to have a faulty view of the new covenant. And as it goes, Dr. Hahn has a whole repertoire of teaching on the covenant. But it appears to me that he hasn't gotten it right, because he's got the first covenant wrong. The first covenant that was rejected included the ceremonial, civil, and moral laws of Israel. That is, the whole thing was taken away. You can't have half a covenant, you know. And of course, someone might say, well, doesn't the New Testament teach that, you know, thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not steal? Of course it does. But it's not doing it because the Mosaic covenant is still in force. It's doing it because it's borrowing from the Mosaic covenant those principles that are good and wholesome, and it put it into the Catholic Church. Now it's under the new covenant. So you could say the new covenant is the one that teaches thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, as Paul says in Romans 13. Okay? So you can't have two covenants. And I think this is part of the problem, if not the whole problem, when Dr. Hahn teaches that the old covenant has not been revoked. He's taught that at least twice in public. And that's false. The whole old covenant has been revoked and replaced by the new covenant. There are not two covenants existing at the same time. So that's why I said, if you have a faulty view of the Mosaic covenant, you're going to have a faulty view of the new covenant. And it's imperative that we understand that the whole Mosaic law was abrogated. And you can find those verses all over the New Testament. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 6 to 14, Hebrews 7:18, Hebrews 8, verses 1 to 13, Hebrews 10, verse 9, Ephesians 2, verses 14 to 15, Colossians 2, verses 13 to 15, all over the New Testament. Okay? You can find it all over the fathers, all over the medievals, all over the councils of the church. No one is making the distinction between ceremonial law and moral law in the Old Covenant, in the Mosaic Covenant. And if Jerome is the one that we should look to, then by golly, we need the verses. We need the citations of where Jerome said that, and we need it in context. Okay? And so far, after 25 years of asking and pleading and cajoling, I haven't gotten any. So, and it's not in their commentary, in their Romans commentary that was put out by Curtis Mitch and I think Ignatius Press. So there you go. You have the whole story. Okay. All right.